This is the Senate State Government Finance Policy and Elections Committee. Today being Wednesday, February 16th, 2022. And glad to have you all here today. As usual, we have a full agenda with a lot of things to get done, and glad to be here to be able to do that. So first thing we're going to do today is we're going to take a roll call. And so, Ms. Wilson, will you call the roll?
Senator Kiffmeyer.
Present.
Senator Howe.
Present.
Senator Carlson. Senator Clausen.
Present.
Senator Fateh. Senator Curran.
Present.
Senator Pratt. Senator Osmick.
Present.
Senator Carlson. Senator Fateh. Senator Pratt. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. We have a quorum. Members, a reminder to you.
No, I got a quorum. Okay.
All right, I think it's good now. There are two things you have to mute. One is on your laptop itself, and then if you're here present in the committee as well, the microphone. So I think those two things. All right, with that, we're going to start with the first item on our agenda today, and that is Senate File 2676. Senator Dibble, I just want to be sure you are on camera, online at this time?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'm here.
Wonderful. Okay, very good. So I'll move Senate File 2676. And Senator Dibble, glad to have you here today. And I note that you have a delete everything amendment, but this is a second stop for your committee. So this would not be an author's amendment. But I think instead of going into anything further, I think it might be better if you talked about the amendment, and then we'll take the motion on regards to it, because it, in essence, is also your bill. Would you go ahead and do that? And Senator Dibble, you know your name for the audio record, and then go ahead and present.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm State Senator Scott Dibble. Thank you so much. And I appreciate, Madam Chair, you're moving this hearing from yesterday to today. I really appreciate that. I had some personal family business to tend to. And I will speak to the A4 amendments, not so much as an amendment to what was also a delete everything amendment at the first stop, but it really is the entirety of the bill with only some minor changes. And so the amendment itself is just kind of a reorganization of how the bill is written, and then a piece of it was taken out from transportation, which will then help us avoid a third committee stop on our way to finance. So thank you, Madam Chair. Senate File 2676, as encapsulated, like I said, in the A4 amendment, is a requirement for the legislative auditor to conduct either a special review or a program evaluation, or a combination of the two, on the Southwest Light Rail Transit project. And it goes on then to give the legislative auditor authority to develop and design the elements of either the evaluation or the review, but it suggests a number of things that the legislative auditor might take a look at, and those are enumerated under paragraph C. There are 17 elements that are suggested as possible things that they could take a look at. It goes on to provide some protections and provisions for those who cooperate with the study or the analysis or investigation, whatever you want to call it, by the legislative auditor, and then it provides some funding if they should require it. It's not completely sure that they will need to, and if that doesn't happen, then of course those dollars would revert to the general fund. But by way of a little bit of context and background and what brings this bill to us today, last year, about the middle part of the year, it became apparent that there was going to be yet another announced delay and quite a bit more money devoted to the construction project. I think it originally had been estimated to be a little over $1 billion to build the Green Line extension, or what we know as Southwest LRT. And then, dribs and drabs started coming in, and 100 million here, 200 there, and then suddenly 1.65, boom, that was the amount that it was going to be pegged to, and we were going to hold the line at $1.65 billion. And then other elements started materializing that started driving that number up north of 2 billion, or very, very close to 2 billion. Keep in mind that about 900 and some million of this is the federal match, because the feds thought it would come in somewhat under $2 billion, and so they were going to match one for one up to about 900 million. They're not going to be providing any more dollars. That's the amount that they've set and has been approved by the FTA and affirmed by the executive branch in Congress. And then it was announced that Hennepin County, now all of this except for a little bit that came in the early days, is being funded by Hennepin County property taxes. It came to light that Hennepin County was going to be asked to provide another $200 million in so-called contingency, but it seemed pretty clear that that money was just going to be forked over in pretty short order to the contractors. And there was rumors of more delays. And at the same time, there was some indication that some of this, or maybe most of it, in terms of cost increases and delays, might be the function of some management and oversight issues at the Met Council. So Representative Hornstein and I approached the legislative auditor and asked them to do what's called a special review, which is kind of like a program evaluation, but in the interim. We didn't fully understand what a special review was. We just knew that we needed information quickly about what the heck was going on. Legislative auditor agreed to consider the request and started doing some initial data gathering and just a little bit of assessment and evaluation on the information that they were able to obtain. And the upshot is that they declined to do a special review because what needed to be done was probably beyond the scope of what is typically a more confined set of questions, and they probably needed to do something a little more expansive, and probably didn't have the resources and the staff time and ability to conduct what needed to be conducted. But they did provide a pretty interesting trove of information, which came to us in the form of a memo with supporting documentation, which I think you have in your packet. If not, it's posted online. It was posted online for the Transportation Committee hearing, and also the Legislative Commission on Metropolitan Government posted the memo as well. And that shows that the contractor that is required by the Federal Transit Administration to provide some objective analysis around change orders, costs, quality control, implications for schedule, et cetera, has been providing the Met Council with some pretty strong advice around those subjects. And it is unhappy that the Met Council has been disregarding much, if not most, of their advice. So much so that they've actually required that any documents that go forward over which they've had some review have a disclaimer attached to it that says that it does not reflect their best advice. And so that's concerning. What do we know? We're just legislators and people just tell us stuff. So we need experts who can really get in and burrow in and examine the record and the evidence and the like. And so it became clear that we needed to program evaluation, special review, whatever you want to call it, and started preparing some legislative language to that effect. Not knowing fully if we were going to ask for the legislative auditor's action by virtue of passing legislation or go through the regular audit commission process. But we wanted to proceed with at least getting something enshrined in writing in the form of legislation, and at least have a larger public discussion around that. So fast forward to a month or a little more than a month ago, and turns out that another $700 million in addition to the $200 million is going to be needed to complete the project. That's going to get us close to 2.7 something or $2.8 billion for the entirety of the project, and it's going to be delayed yet another 2 or 3 years, I think. So putting even a little more urgency and impetus on this kind of analysis. We also, myself and Representative Hornstein, sought out conversation with the legislative auditor to see what their preference is. Theirs is, of course, to protect the audit commission and legislative audit process and just go through the normal request process, which we took as good advice, but also sought out the chair, Senator Coran, who's on this committee, so he could talk about his thoughts on the matter, as well as Representative Hansen, who's the co-chair of the Audit Commission. And they feel like the elements that the legislative auditor really wants to protect, which is keeping the audit process and the commission and the work of the legislative auditor from being a pinball and being an instrument of partisanship, was largely avoided in this discussion, because it's supported by the governor. This idea is supported by the governor, is supported bicamerally, is supported on a bipartisan basis. So we kind of split the difference in requiring that something be undertaken, letting the legislative auditor some autonomy in determining what exactly is undertaken and what the elements are, and providing some resources as well, so that if they need to bring in some expertise to extend their reach a little bit, hence the appropriation. And so, Madam Chair, that is probably the very high level overview of the bill.
Thank you very much, Senator Dibble. By the way, I do want to express my condolences to you on your immediate family member and what you've been going through the last week, plus carrying this bill at the same time, which is very, very important, and you've done your due diligence in the midst of all that. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
The other thing that I really appreciate, Senator Dibble, that we're in session right now, and I think it was a really right approach that you took to do the legislation. But I also think it was also really important that we, both Senator Coran and I serve on the subcommittee on topic selection for the program evaluation. So both of us will look out for this issue in regards to the Audit Commission. But most importantly is the providing resources for the legislative auditor. That's really, really important. And that is something that a bill can do that a request or topic selection does not come with. So that's really, really important, especially for something like this that is substantial and will take a significant amount of effort no matter what kind it is. But before we go further, I'm going to have Ms. Randall come up and address the amendment. Then I'll call on Senator Osmek, has his hand up, and Senator Coran next. Ms. Randall.
Thank you. Whoa, it's loud. Thank you, Madam Chair and members. For the record, my name is Judy Randall. I'm the legislative auditor. Thanks for allowing time for me to talk today. I do want to thank Senator Dibble and Senator Newman, who's a co-author on this bill, for working with me on the language here. Some of you were in the Transportation Committee and heard me say that I had a couple of concerns about the bill. Those concerns are addressed with this delete everything bill, so I am comfortable with this. I do just want you all to know that we too are concerned about the way Southwest Light Rail has been handled, and we have already initiated, under our special review authority, we have already initiated aspects of a special review. We've sent a fairly extensive letter to the Metropolitan Council asking for information on a number of the issues that are itemized in this bill. So I can guarantee you that we are looking into this. And then, as Senator Dibble mentioned, the way the language is in the bill, it will allow the Legislative Audit Commission to go through the program evaluation topic selection process and consider this topic as one of the program evaluations. So, Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Randall. Has also help us with Senator Rest when we get to the Senate floor to avoid a 30-minute history and discussion and how important it is to pay for these things and the language. So, but I appreciate you and Senator Dibble, Senator Newman have been a big part of this, so we appreciate that. And thank you for your message today. It's well taken. Thank you. Next, we'll go to Senator Osmic, and would you address your question either, is it to Ms. Randall or to Senator Dibble?
Senator
Oh,
Dibble.
Senator Dibble, okay.
Senator Dibble, we've now found another bill that we both agree upon. Again, another sign of the apocalypse, I believe. Couple questions.
Keep your things muted. When you speak into the microphone, you don't need to,
I don't know how that came off mute.
yeah, it's something flips.
It's doing it itself. So, Senator Dibble, two questions. One, there has been language, I believe, started to strip the Met Council of oversight of this project. That's not in this bill, but I believe you may have some connectivity to that. Is that true?
Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Osmic, yes, I introduced a bill that would take the project out of building the project, the remainder of the project, out of the hands of the Met Council and put it into the hands of the Department of Transportation. Members may be aware that MnDOT actually built the Blue Line, the Hiawatha Corridor, and also built the North Star Corridor, which may or may not be a good thing. But and it may be a little bit preemptive for me to put in a bill like that because we don't have the results of this analysis. But I put it in because maybe it's a great idea. I think it certainly warrants some consideration and discussion. I'm actually just so everyone knows, soon we'll be putting in a bill that would invest the authority to build these kinds of large-scale public works transit projects in fixed guideways or separated right-of-way that are of $100 million cost or more into the hands of the Department of Transportation, regardless of who's going to own and operate the facility in the future.
Senator Osmic.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, Senator Dibble, I volunteer right now to be on that bill. My dislike of it did it again. My dislike of Southwest Light Rail, I believe, could be termed as legendary. I don't believe, Senator Dibble, that this is going to come in under $3 billion when everything's said and done. Now we've heard rumors of a warehouse that now has a cracked floor on it as a result of the tunnel, and it is an unusable facility. That's only going to add to the cost. Senator Dibble, I have a bill I'd like you to look at when you come back to the building at some point in time. It is on my desk. There's one slot left on it that I'd like you to take a look and consider. It's 250 pages, so you may probably think, you probably know what I'm going to talk about when we meet. But I will ask this, there are 2 additional slots left on this bill. You could use another majority member. Could I add myself to this bill?
Well,
Absolutely.
Senator
Sorry,
Osmic.
Madam Chair.
Senator
you.
Dibble.
Madam Chair, thank you. Certainly, Senator Osmic, I'll have my staff send a note.
Thank you, Senator Dibble.
Members, okay. All right, anybody else? I think Senator Cran, okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Senator Dibble, I appreciate bringing this bill forward. I think the topic list of criteria to look at was exhaustive and needed. And I've spoke to Ms. Randall in the OLA, and being the chair of the Legislative Audit Commission, we will be having a conversation at our next meeting to talk about, the goal. All of us, I think it's one of the great bodies that we are united in preserving its nonpartisan nature in its function. But in this case, this particular project highlights the need, not only to highlight it through the selection process, but also in addition to when they come up. I think on our list today we have some rent aid. When we have over $500 million, and projects go out and we need oversight. We have Southwest Light Rail feeding our future. We get COVID dollars, and also the legislative auditor is doing a great job. I think it's appropriate that we at least indicate or have a bill for appropriation. If Ms. Randall could hire today, we'd probably give her more. But she is unable to even fill that staff. So we're going to talk about how do we make sure these projects get the timeliness and the resources necessary. So this bill, we've all had great conversations from the perspective of the preservation of that body of the OLA is critical. But this project and your bill is also critical that we get this done in the most expedited time frame possible. Ms. Randall, what I would ask is that when we go through here, if you guys have heard me before, it's all about the procurement process and the definition of the rules. So not only the individual rules, but the complex decisions necessary throughout these complex projects. This being no different. What I've found is that we don't have many that are experts at those levels. We don't foster that type of training environment within our agencies, whether it be technology or road building. I would look at the procurement. I'm really going to be interested to find out what methodologies did we use in procurement to make sure and vet, extract the greatest knowledge in the industry who builds these projects prior to signing the contract, and did we have open and effective communications during the Q&A portion of it? Because today, we don't typically do that very well, and typically the first effective communications are typically post-contract signing. So it leaves the state at great risk to support or defend the business rules and requirements, and we ultimately end up with these types of large change orders that we can't defend. And so I would really like to see some focus on that because it's critical for these road projects, rail projects, and or IT projects. So just comments, no need to respond, Ms. Randall or Senator Dibble, but we will work hard, and like I said, the LAC, we will talk about this topic and make sure we put together a set of guidelines and a framework to make sure we don't run into conflict and that everything we do here and that involves legislative auditors is purely bipartisan in nature. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Karan. Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Dibble or Ms. Randall, I mentioned in transportation, the Metropolitan Governments Commission actually passed a resolution that Senator Dibble and Representative Hornstein both authored, requiring Metropolitan Council to look at Calhoun Isle specifically, the impact on the building regarding the tunnel that goes within inches of the foundation. Would that be part of the special review, or would that be part of the program review to make sure, and maybe Senator Dibble, you even know, because we also talked about allowing the homeowners association to have a voice in that discussion. Do we know that happened? And Ms. Randall, will you be looking at that in one of these two segments?
Ms. Randall.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senator Pratt. Thank you for the question. Yeah, the building, I know that building well that you're talking about with the cracks. It's very concerning, and it will certainly be captured in at least one, if not both, of the things of the inquiries that we do. I think it comes down to route decisions of where the train is going in the first place. It comes down to transparency in the process, communication with stakeholders. So it would be more fully captured in the program evaluation, because that's going to look more broadly. If it's selected by the Audit Commission, it would look more broadly at the management and the decisions, and what did people know when, and how did they consider all the information they had when they were making those decisions. But we will ask some of those questions as well in the special review.
Thank you, Ms. Randall.
Sure.
Senator Dibble, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question, Senator Pratt. I think this question really gets to the heart of two issues that I think we really need to consider. One is, as Ms. Randall said, articulated, how well did the Met Council consider all the information that it was being provided with during the planning phase and the study phase of this facility. And I think more importantly, if it's shown that important information and data was disregarded, why was it disregarded? What is it about the Met Council that causes that agency to to close its eyes to really, really important considerations that are coming from outside of the agency itself. And I could extemporate for some period of time on this very question with respect to those towers. The short version is they were told time and time and time again that these towers were unique and highly susceptible to disturbance. Not based on conjecture, based on what they already knew because they had had that experience with the construction project farther away by a few hundred yards. And still, the Met Council chose to only respond to fairly substantial information with like a one-sentence reply that was entirely bureaucratic in nature. We are upholding the dictates of the FTA or something like that. And the second part of the analysis is, has the Met Council managed this construction project once it got underway as well it could? And on this subject, after Representative Hornstein and I finally compelled the Met Council to take a look at the unique circumstances of this particular situation, the Met Council was forced to do a study in the field and concluded, oh, everything everyone's been telling us is true. That the vibration on this building doesn't ameliorate or mitigate as it moves up the building. It exaggerates because there's something unique about this particular. So we need to find a solution. And that solution was, pile driving with a different technique. Through press in place, not hammering, not vibrating. But guess what happened on day one of pile driving? The construction firm started using a vibratory hammer to pile drive, as if all of the conversations we had didn't even exist. I, of course, called the Met Council immediately because, the residents were beyond livid. And the Met Council immediately pointed the finger at the contractor as if they had no responsibility for that occurrence. So these raise really important and troubling questions about just from going back many years to the present day, about culture, about accountability, about transparency, about responsiveness, about competency and management and oversight. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Dibble. I think it shows the importance of the fact that when you have that much power and there's no check or balance to it, they don't listen to it. I think you wisely are introducing the other bill to transfer that they have proven themselves to be unable to manage that for the good of their area, which they're supposed to be doing. And so I think that's going to be a very good thing. But I think just too much power without check and balance to the whole thing is never a good idea. Senator Howe, did you?
Yes, Madam
Okay,
Chair.
Senator Howe.
I'll move the A4 amendment.
All right, A4 amendment being moved and thoroughly discussed. With that, members, we'll go ahead and take a vote. Please unmute or use your microphone, whatever that is. And all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion prevails. And the A4 amendment to Senate File 2676 is adopted. With that, Senator Dibble, we've already had a bit of discussion, so I think we're just going to go ahead and vote on the bill to move it on to the Finance Committee. And so I think for that, we have Senator Howe, you've moved the amendment. Would you go ahead and make the motion?
Yes, Madam Chair. I move that Senate Files 2676 as amended be recommended to pass and referred to the Finance Committee.
On that motion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion prevails and is adopted. Senator Dibble, you're on your way to the Finance Committee. I'll see you there.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to move to the testimony table to present my bill, the next two bills, and Senator Howe will take over chairmanship, and I'll be moving here. Senator Howe, and you can, I think it works better if you're here.
I think already got me here, so.
Yeah. So I just got to be sure I've got all my stuff.
So Senator Kiffmeyer, your first bill up would be Senate File 2956. Would
Thank
you
you,
like
Mr.
to move the amendment right away, Madam Chair?
Yes, I will. It's a delete everything amendment, and it's an author's amendment, Mr. Chair.
So Senator Kiffmeyer moves the A1 amendment to get the bill in the shape she would prefer. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Senator Kiffmeyer, to your bill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members. I would like to just explain the bill and initiating it by making sure, there are a few things that were concerns in regards to the processing of ballots last year and questions. And so the thought was, how can we bring a greater degree of confidence so that the system can prove that it has handled things correctly, not to the satisfaction of those who may be doing the work. I know they get to see all that. However, elections are about the people. It is their election. It is the people's election. It is about the voters' election. And it's about serving them through legislation in a way that helps them to prove to themselves in a greater degree. So one of the things that this legislation does, and the amendment did, was making sure that each ballot that is submitted, especially with voting by mail, there are lots of questions. There were complaints that they were receiving multiple ballots. Sometimes, though, they were absentee ballot applications, not ballots. And again, these are people who are concerned about that. And so the effort was to write some language here that every ballot that would be prepared and distributed under current statute, printed on paper that contains a security marking designed to allow verification of the ballot's authenticity. So the Secretary of State office sent a letter commenting on the original language, and this amendment is addressing that language by giving more flexibility in regards to the security marking, that it doesn't interfere with the tabulator's ability to accurately read the ballot, and then the form must be prescribed by the Secretary of State, and at a local election, the form of the watermark must be prescribed by the county auditor or municipal clerk. So for the purpose here, it can be a watermark, ultraviolet light marking, or other substantially equivalent marking. That was some needed flexibility to help reduce costs that may be there. One thing I want to mention in regards to elections, we have spent a lot of money on elections. But again, that is money well spent, because elections are the foundation of everything else we do in government. And so it's important to realize that we want to be reasonable, but in many cases, there has been a significant amount of money that has been sent out to local units of government to assist them in the implementation of their duties. The next part of this bill, I went with the description of the marking first. The next one is that prior to depositing a ballot, the members of the ballot board must verify that the ballot contains the security marking required. And again, this is something that if the ballot does not contain the required security marking, they must be returned. And we are exempting, by the way, uniformed and overseas voters. They have a unique, different kind of process. And so at this time, we felt it was really important to not add anything there, so for information for you to know. So, Mr. Chair and members, this is what the bill is for, its purpose, and some discussion about that. I believe, Mr. Chair, there are some testifiers. There's also a letter in your packet from the Secretary of State, but that was sent out prior to the amendment that we have today. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I see we have first on the list for testifiers is Kim Crockett. If you could come to the testifiers table, and then please state your name for the audio record and proceed with your testimony.
Good morning, Chair Howe. My name is Kim Crockett. I'm an attorney with a focus on elections, voting, and election integrity in particular. And I'll be candid and also introduce myself as a candidate for Secretary of State so that people don't say, why didn't she say that? Because I am, Mr. Chair. I'm testifying in support of Senator Kiffmeyer's bill, Senate File Number 2956. Minnesotans on both sides of the aisle, I think it's fair to say, have expressed a lot of doubt in the last several election seasons over election outcomes. After 2016, our U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar expressed grave concerns about outcomes and even made a film called Kill Chain about it. And after the 2020 election, I think we all know that Republicans in particular, but I think citizens across the aisle, both sides of the aisle, are worried about election outcomes. And this is leading to a divisiveness in our country that's just not healthy. I think part of it is our heavy reliance on absentee ballots. The Minnesota vote in 2020, 58% of the votes counted were by absentee ballot and or early voting. That's approximately 6 out of 10 votes. The chain of custody is weak. There is no party balance, that is Republicans and Democrats looking at absentee ballots on our county absentee ballot boards in most, but not all, counties. And we have insecure ballot boxes now scattered throughout the metro. I note that in 35 out of 47 European nations, there are no absentee ballots. They have concluded that that form of voting is unwise and leads to fraud. And as Senator Kiffmeyer noted, sometimes it's the appearance of impropriety. It's the appearance of insecurity undermining confidence on the part of voters that I think we do need to address. 10 European nations do allow absentee ballots, but you have to pick it up in person and show your identification. All nations in Europe, all 46 out of 47 do require voter ID, by the way. Merry old England being the exception, but she's got it under consideration. So in conclusion, I would say that the watermark is an improvement, but let's not be fooled by that. I think it's only a start in addressing the confidence issues that voters have. Security measures are terrific, but I think there are other things that Minnesota, the legislature, and the Secretary of State can do. Finally, I think we should reconsider our heavy reliance on absentee voting, return to the civic traditions that unite us as a people and as Minnesotans on Election Day by shifting back as much as possible to in-person voting or voting at our City Hall. Thank you for allowing my testimony this morning, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Crockett. For now, I think we'll hold questions unless someone's got questions for this testifier, we'll go to the next testifier. I see none. So we'll go to Nicole Freeman from the Secretary of State's office. Is she, there is a, if you could just hang on here, it appears that we do have a question from Senator Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to ask Ms. Crockett, she made some statements there about chain of custody is weak, insecure ballot boxes, and and the lack of reliance on mail-in voting and absentee ballots. Can she cite any cases of improprieties or fraud that has been alleged, demonstrated, or is being prosecuted on any of these particular accusations?
Ms. Crockett.
Mr. Chair, Senator Carlson, good morning to you. I'm not sure that the committee wants to litigate all of the allegations that have been made about absentee ballot insecurity. They are numerous. I would be happy to submit something helpful to the committee, Mr. Chair, if that would be welcome. We certainly could have a discussion about chain of custody, particularly with regard to the next topic, the next bill that Senator Kiffmeyer is offering, with all of these absentee ballot applications proliferating from third-party groups as opposed to official absentee ballot applications requested by voters. You have the problem of things being sent out in the mail and arriving in mailboxes that are being stolen throughout the country, certainly not just in Minnesota. The problem of people dropping them in ballot boxes versus, securely delivering the vote so it can be counted. I don't think that's what we're doing this morning, Mr. Chair, though I'd be happy to have a conversation with Senator Carlson if you
And
would
Ms.
like.
Crockett, if you've got some of that, if you want to
Yes.
send that to the committee, we'll make sure it gets
Yes,
distributed.
I'm part of a national election integrity group that has documented a lot of these problems, and I would be more than happy to forward those to the committee.
Thank you, Ms. Crockett.
You're
Senator
welcome.
Carlson.
Yeah, I'll follow up. I'm not looking for any huge number. Do you have one
Do I have one, what,
Ms.
Senator
Crockett.
Carlson?
that has been alleged,
Senator Carlson?
investigated, and
We should be waiting our turn, and we'll, for the audio record, so I can acknowledge you, Senator Carlson, and then come back to Ms. Crockett. Senator Carlson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and Ms. Crockett, do you have one example, or do you have one county where this has been alleged and investigated and is being prosecuted?
Senator Carlson, I will tell you that I can give you an example myself, but I don't think that's what we're here to discuss here, exactly which ones. I think that the bill kind of speaks for itself, but if, Ms. Crockett, if you want to give one, you can, but I think there's plenty of them out there. Ms. Crockett.
Well, there's also, Mr. Chair and Senator Carlson, sort of an official position, and there has been for years in Minnesota, that we just don't have any voter fraud. And I think that there's a lack of interest on the part of county attorneys in pursuing it, which also lends to the problem of voter confidence in our elections. So there certainly have been lots of allegations of voter fraud. I do believe there have been several successful prosecutions of that. There is, as I said, though, there is a tradition of not pursuing it after the fact. It's just part of the culture, unfortunately, of voting that I think is another area we need to improve on in Minnesota. But I think what we have before us is a strong measure, a watermark measure that is flexible for counties to pursue to increase voter confidence that the process, not just for the election officials, as Senator Kiffmeyer said, but for the voters themselves, where I think it's just a very simple measure that I'm surprised we haven't adopted previously.
Thank you, Ms. Crockett. Senator Carlson, one more follow-up. We got to move on because we got another bill yet. Senator Carlson.
Mr. Chair, this is an extremely important issue. We have had lots of statements here about things that we should be concerned about with our voting process, and accusations about the entire voting process, and in fact accusations against my own county attorney not prosecuting people who have done voter fraud. And there are people who break the law. There are people who do vote twice. There are people who do things, but guess what? They're caught. They are caught and they are prosecuted. And in fact, I've been looking at how much this is done across the state, and it's minimal. And so we need to be sure that when we talk about the accusations of fraud and the accusations of things that are across the country or across Minnesota, that we be accurate. And we need to be able to say that our elections in Minnesota are honest, straightforward, and if there's something that needs to be corrected, let's work on that. Let's not work on accusations. So, Mr. Chair, we did not get an example here. And I think that that's very telling. And what we need to do is we need to say, hey, the reason people are not happy with elections in Minnesota is because we have people who continue to say that there is fraud, but they don't prove it. We have had lots of accusations and court cases across the country that have failed and been thrown out. And in fact, in my own county, this has been an issue. And I have gone to presentations on it, and I have seen and learned what people are exaggerating, embellishing, and showing that is incorrect. Now, I have one more question here, and that is, and actually, this is not for this testifier, so I'll ask it later. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, you know, I'd like to get the discussion back to the bill. This is not a bill about rehashing the 2020 election as Senator Carlson's trying to infuse. As I understand the bill, and Senator Kiffmeyer, please correct me if I'm wrong, this is about adopting to new ways of voting and adopting to new technologies and making sure that it's not about reacting to fraud, it's about preventing possible, and I don't want to use the word fraud, but possible issues down the line. And this seems, I've never heard in the testimony, Senator Kiffmeyer didn't talk about the 2020 election. Ms. Crockett didn't talk about the 2020 election. And I think it's just taking us off base, and I'd like to get back to the bill.
Thank you, Senator Pratt. Senator Fateh.
Mr. Chair, if I can just.
Chair Kiffmeyer. Hang on.
Go ahead.
Chair Kiffmeyer.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate this. One of the things that's really, really important is that the system has the responsibility, the election system has the responsibility to show to the voters and to put things in place at the time of balloting, counting ballots, that whole process. That system owes it to the voters. And so you're exactly right, Senator Pratt. As we come along with some of these technologies, just like e-poll books that I've worked on for many years, the accuracy of entering the data by picking up the driver's license or Minnesota state ID card at the same time, and those kinds of technologies which weren't there many years ago can really help to improve and make things better. In this regard, though, in applying something as simple as a marking to be sure that we have this, because as we all know, with computers today, you can mock up just about anything and make something look like what it isn't. And we have systems in place all over, from banks to mobile banking and a whole variety of things that do some of these verifications and checks and things. Doing it here was something so important that is so crucial to the whole foundation of our government is worth that kind of effort and worth those kind of opportunities that we take to close loopholes prior to some of those things going wrong. Much better to deal with prevention. So thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make those comments for right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kiffmeyer. Senator Fateh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is both for Senator Kiffmeyer and Ms. Crockett. In regards to Senator Pratt's comment, actually both the chair and Ms. Crockett brought up previous elections, and that the need for this is to solve probably a problem that is not even there, and that there's a lack of confidence in our elections. So Ms. Crockett brought up that there are some Democrats that did not accept previous elections, like the 2016 election. And I'm here to say that I believe that Donald Trump was legitimately elected in 2016. So my question for Ms. Crockett is, do you legitimately believe that President Trump lied in 2020?
You know,
Chair?
Senator Fate, I don't think that's an appropriate question for this. It doesn't pertain to the bill. So if you want to ask a different question, that's fine, but please
understand.
stick to the content of the bill.
I understand, Mr. Chair, but she brought up that point in her testimony, so I'd like to get that clarification, please.
It's not relative to the bill. We're not going to allow, I'm not going to allow the question. So if you have a different question, Senator Fate, that's fine, but I'm not going to allow that question.
That's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Carlson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have just one simple question right now, is that, is the testifier aware that the watermark issue was an initiation from the QAnon conspiracy? And actually was, and you know, we can smile about it, but all you have to do is Google QAnon and watermark, and you'll get the answer. This is something that I think we need to get real. We need to get honest. And the watermark is, and we'll talk about that further later, but that was the initiation, is QAnon. You Google QAnon and watermark. And Mr. Chair, I think that Senator Fate's question was especially appropriate. And that is one of the problems of not being able to trust our elections, is that there is an agenda out there to develop issues to not trust our elections. And I think what we need to do is we need to find out who does and who doesn't. And I think anyone who is running for the Secretary of State should be able to answer that question. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair?
We're going to move to Ms. Freeman from the Secretary of State's office and hopefully get us back on topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am here to answer questions today. If there are questions, the Secretary submitted letters stating some concerns with the bills prior, like Senator Kiffmeyer mentioned, prior to the amendment. But I'm just here to answer questions. So I don't have any testimony at this time.
So, Ms. Freeman, you are, the Secretary of State's office is okay with the bill as amended?
I just saw the amendment right now. And so I think the portion of our letter that I would point to is, we currently have systems in place. And so to ensure that only official ballots are tabulated. And so I think that this bill adds an additional administrative burden onto counties. And so that would be, still our concern with the bill.
Thank you, Ms. Freeman.
So, Mr. Chair?
Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do think that the Secretary of State's concerns have been addressed in regards to this bill, in both avoiding their question about the tabulator and also giving flexibility. But nevertheless, they need time. As I read the letter this morning, drafted the amendment, I really appreciate the staff turning it around so quickly and being able to have the language adjusted today, but the Secretary of State will need to have the time to review that as well. I do want to address, I just thought it was the interesting subject to bring up, implying or accusing or whatever the language was here about an other source. This is my language. This is language that I worked on, language that I've thought of before, and as I've seen some of the technology around. So just to be really clear, and I wanted to make sure that that was on the record. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Kiffmeyer. Senator Osmick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Short comment.
Senator Kiffmeyer, I've never seen so much fighting over a very small common sense item. I've never seen such bickering and such assertions about simply wanting to make sure that the ballot has a watermark on it that, by the way, was sent out to the individual with the same condition, to make sure simply that it's the same thing that was sent. I've never seen so much fighting, regardless of the source, of just such a common sense. You go out in the hallway and ask the general public, Should the ballot have a watermark that it was sent out, and should it be checked before it's counted to make sure the watermark is there? I bet you 9 out of 10 average people will say, yes, it's common sense. This isn't voter ID, this is nothing of the sort. This is simply a common sense verification measure to make sure it's there. So, Mr. Chair, I request a roll call vote.
A roll call's been requested. Senator Carlson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess we've gone further than what my question was about, but we did, the inferences were about past elections, and the only past election that was a national election is the 2020 election, and we're trying to work on things for the next election, and when we talk about QAnon being related to this, that's a fact. That is not a dreamed up conspiracy theory. That's a fact. And when we have issues like what happened in Arizona, we don't want that to happen in Minnesota. We don't think it can happen in Minnesota. But there was a huge cost to that, whatever you want to call it, fraud circus that happened down there. It didn't change the election other than it made a few more votes for the winner of the state, but it cost tons of money, and in fact, it sprang lots of accusations of bamboo in ballots and watermarks being needed, and looking at ballots with ultraviolet light. This is something that we don't have any issue that this is solving in Minnesota. And to Senator Osmick's issue that he brought up, what if a ballot does not have a watermark on it? Does that mean that voter gets canceled? Does that mean that voter's ballot can be thrown out? What that means is that any ballot that's printed with a watermark has to have a chain of custody as well before it's voted on. So this is something that is extremely serious, and I think as was alleged in Arizona, this can lead to some nefarious handling of ballots. And so I'm happy with our election as we had. I'm happy that we elected the last 2 presidents with the system that we have, and with the system that we have in Minnesota. And I'm not afraid at all to admit.
Senator Carlson, could we get to the bill, please? And I've got other folks that have questions.
This is the bill. This is the bill. We are attempting to put something into the law that is not needed and is not justified. So this is the bill, Mr. Chair.
Senator Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And a question for Senator Kiffmeyer. And this is one of curiosity. I know in the bill it talks about that the ballots that are prepared and distributed to military and overseas absentee voters would not have the mark. And I'm just curious, why not?
Senator Kiffmeyer.
There's got to be a reason, I'm sure, but I just don't know.
Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Clausen, yes. When we worked with General Counsel on the drafting of the bill, UOCAVA voters are often in a separate category due to the nature of how they cast their ballots and things that they do, military and overseas. They're in a unique situation. There also are not many of them, but in the discussion with Council, it was a decision we made in that particular case to not include them in this requirement.
Senator Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, in looking at this, it does add a level of complexity to our voting process. And I'm just wondering if adding a watermark widens the possibility for election irregularities. I can think of all kinds of things of people counterfeiting these and different things, and I just wonder if it's another level that's just going to lead to additional problems, or conspiracy theories that we've talked about, which really undermine our process of our elections and so many other processes that we've experienced over the last few years. So I am concerned about that. And then you talk about the cost that's involved, which is, from what I understand, is extremely expensive to do this. So I have some real concerns, some real doubts about this moving ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Clausen. And Senator Kiffmeyer, you'd like to move your bill to be laid over?
I will, but I'm going to respond to a couple
Yes.
things first. And then, yes, we will lay the bill over. First of all, the purchasing of ballots is a very large print job. And when you have something added to it, it increased the cost. But again, it is a very, very large purchase. And the purpose of the flexibility of the language, you're using the specific word watermark or somebody else ultraviolet, there may be other methods that would be more economical or simpler to apply. So what we laid out here was parameters and also the authority to the county auditor, generally the county election official or municipal, and also at a federal or state election, the Secretary of State office. So we've got some checks and balances there in regards to reviewing that, but we've set the parameters of what must be included. So I think we've addressed that. In regards to, very frequently when you ask questions, especially these days, and you're asking a question, it's amazing to me that the election system is something that we work on every single year. There are going to be changes always. There'll be a variety of things. So it's always prudent for us when we have a known potential that we step into working on that and strengthening it, just as we have done other things. And I look back to my years of being an election judge back when there were no precinct optical scans in our area. We counted by hand, stacks of 25. You know, you had checks and balances there too, because the methodology was a little bit different. So now we have this one. In regards to chain of custody, currently the chain of custody for blank ballots does exist. They are wrapped in foil, in plastic, they are shrink wrapped, they are kept track of, they're part of the final count that comes out. And so there is already a great deal of that in that chain of custody legislation that we already have in the processing of ballots. And I think it's really important to stay away from, Senator Carlson made some comment about where he had Googled something, but he's basically accusing me of doing the same thing and questioning, putting all kinds of questions here that don't need to exist. And I want to say once again, this is a concept and something that that is of my own. I remember in years past, there are always kind of questions like somehow, as a former Secretary of State, that I couldn't think of things on my own, that I would have to Google something. That is not the case. Mr. Chair, I'd like to lay the bill over for possible inclusion, and if you would do such direction as chair, I'd appreciate it.
Senator Kiffmeyer renews her motion for Senate File 2956 to be laid over as amended for possible inclusion. Senator Kiffmeyer, to your bill, Senate File 3077. You'd like to move the A1 amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I will move the A1 amendment to Senate File 3077.
Senator Kiffmeyer moves the A1 amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. The bill is amended. Senator Kiffmeyer, to your bill as amended.
Thank you very
Mr.
much.
Chair, could I just ask a procedural question, please?
Senator Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Clausen, excuse me.
Senator Osment had asked for a roll call vote. Is that then eliminated when it's a laid-over bill? I'm not sure.
Yeah, yes, Senator
Okay.
Clausen. That
Thank
was,
you.
it was, due to it was laid over, there was no roll call. You bet. Senator Kiffmeyer, to your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the subject of this bill has to do with the distribution of absentee ballot applications and sample ballots. So I would say probably all of us as legislators, one of the most frequent during the process of the election last time was confusion. A lot of calls, a lot of questions came to us in regards to thinking that they were getting ballots. In some cases, it was an absentee ballot application. And probably last time there was more of that than I've ever seen before. And so to help avoid voter confusion and those kinds of clarifications of that, the subject of this bill is making sure that any person or entity, as defined, we have a 10A definition here, that mails them, anyone, the state has to comply with this. In addition to the absentee ballot application or sample ballot, the person or entity must include a statement that says this mailing is not an official election communication from a unit of government. The application has not been included at the request of a government official, and that the sample ballot is not an official ballot and the voter must not cast the ballot. And so it'd be some other technical things. So the amendment from the original bill was technical recommendations from staff. Otherwise, it is essentially the same intent in regards to that, to help to avoid that confusion and let voters know when something is unsolicited coming to them, that it is clear that that is the case. And this is the effort we have right here to help accomplish that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Kiffmeyer. And the first on the list of testifiers would be Ms. Crockett. If you could come to your testifiers table and state your name for the audio record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Kim Crockett. I'll make this fairly brief. I received a pile of mail, like a lot of Minnesotans. These organizations mailed out in some but not all states. This is just a sample of what I decided to start keeping because it was showing up, one or two a day in my mailbox. Election Mail Service, the Center for Voter Information, got lots and lots from them, sometimes pre-filled applications for absentee ballots, the Voter Participation Center, and on it went. Frankly, looking fairly official in many cases. And because I was volunteering for the Minnesota Voters Alliance, I was fielding calls and emails from voters, especially elderly voters, who were very confused about these mailings. And as Senator Kiffmeyer noted, very often I would hear that somebody had received multiple ballots in the mail. And when I drilled down and sat down and either looked at what they had received or they described it to me, I was able to walk them through the fact that it was just one of these often pre-filled application from these organizations. Now, we can't stop them from mailing to voters and, using the voter list. It's a free country, right? But I think it's very confusing, and there's got to be some way to distinguish it from the official mail. Like, this is the absentee ballot envelope that I got from the Secretary of State's office, and then another mailing from the Secretary of State urging me to vote from home. And maybe there's some way for the Secretary of State's office to be a little bit more clear that it's them, because frankly, it's hard to distinguish it from all the other noise, if you will, coming into one's mailbox. Whether we're elderly, unsophisticated, just overwhelmed with life and work and all the things we do, I think there's got to be a way, and Senator Kiffmeyer has offered one, to clear up some of the confusion. Just a visual marking on that envelope so you know what to do as a responsible citizen and voter looking at that envelope in your mailbox.
Thank you, Ms.
welcome.
Crockett. Senator Osmek.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Kiffmeyer, so in reading this language, this seems to be not something that applies to any government official or government agency that would be involved in the election process. It would not change anything at the Secretary of State's office, not change anything at the county, city, wherever this, whatever governmental entity, it doesn't change anything they're currently doing, so I read this as no cost. What it does do is it makes sure that if you are not part of the official election process, that you identify yourself as not being part of the official, that this is some level of an advertisement or promotional materials, whatever the case might be, to promote you getting a ballot, but it clearly identifies that this is not an official government document, nor is this officially part of the system. Is that the correct reading?
Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, Senator Osmic, you got it right there. That's very important, and as we all know, there's a variety of times where we receive mail, truth in advertising kind of a thing, where they've tried to look like something they're not, and in this case, they've attempted to make it look like that, and I think that's not fair to voters and other people as well. I think they owe it. And by the way, as far as increased costs, many of these envelopes are already printed and have printed materials, as we all know from our own printing projects. Adding another sentence or adding additional does not increase the cost. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator Osmic.
Senator Osmic? Nope. If you could take your hand down, that would, Senator Fateh?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and this question is for Ms. Crockett. You indicated that in speaking with voters that there was some confusion around not just the applications, but between what official applications were versus official ballots. Is that correct?
Yes.
Senator,
Excuse
Ms.
me,
Crockett.
Mr. Chair, Senator.
Ms. Crockett?
Yes, people that I spoke to, there's a variety of scenarios that played out with the confusion, but some of what we discovered in looking at, these forms or talking with voters is that there were errors in the return address, so that if they had used the pre-filled or the blank applications, it would go to the wrong county or the wrong place to be, processed. And, but also that there were errors in the pre-filled data. And I may even have one myself. I promise I'll go back and look through them, where the voter information was wrong, the address or something in it. And if voters used that, Senator, then they wouldn't, in theory, get the proper ballot. And so when you rely on these third-party groups that are using our voter information from the Secretary of State's office, I think the potential for error, it makes it all the more important that people understand when they're standing at the mailbox that they're not looking at anything official and they therefore should not rely on it.
Senator Fateh?
Throw it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, but that wasn't answering my question. Was there confusion, as you indicated, between an official ballot versus an official application?
Mr.
Or
Chair.
or a pre-filled application?
Mr. Chair
Ms.
and
Ms. Crockett.
Senator, precisely. That's exactly what we heard, over
Okay,
and
so-
over and over again.
Senator Fateh?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess my question is, in walking through this processes with the voters, in what ways did they indicate that these applications resembled ballots where there are pre-filled names versus candidate names being listed? In what ways did they tell you that they were resembling each other?
Ms. Crockett?
Mr. Chair, Senator, I just found, especially with older voters, that there was confusion about what they had received in the mail. People would state to me, I got 2 or 3 absentee ballots in the mail. And I would say, why don't we look at what you actually got? And we would discover, and there are people, by the way, who still insist when I speak to them about it, what I discovered in exploring what they actually received is that it was these types of mailings, and people thought they were ballots, especially when they were pre-filled. It was just very confusing. That's all I can tell you, Senator, is how voters were reacting and the process I went through to try to clear up the confusion.
Senator Fateh, follow-up?
Yeah, I'll just move on to my next piece then. So I guess if this would prohibit applications from being pre-filled, in what ways would the elections office determine that an organization pre-filled an application versus someone like those voters you're talking about um, typing in that information themselves? Would those not be processed if they did that?
Is that a question? Senator
Yeah,
Senator Kiffmeyer, would you like to respond to
Yeah.
that if someone?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, there are several things here that I think you're referring to the Secretary of State letter. There are other things than when an application comes in, and again, if it's pre-populated and you have the name of a particular voter, but the address is different than the state voter registration system, there are a variety of things in there that the system would need to take a look at. Also, many times, all the time, these come to a local election official who often knows people fairly well. But I think if the voter themselves have pre-printed off an absentee ballot, then I think that, and they've done that with their information, but most of the time it is hand-printed, and they prefer to do their own. There are several questions that are asked for in regards to an absentee ballot application that the voter needs to answer. And for somebody else to be pre-populating makes that confusing to voters. So no matter in what way, I think Senator Fateh, those can be addressed by the local election officials.
Senator Fateh.
Yes, but I guess my question is, in what way would they be able to distinguish between a voter doing it versus an organization? And would those election offices be able to discard or throw away those that they think were pre-populated by an organization versus a person wrongfully?
Well, what we are dealing with
Senator
here.
Kiffmeyer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. What we're dealing with here, Senator Fateh, in this bill is what the entity or individual must do when they send out, if they choose to do so, absentee ballot applications. So another section of law would deal with what the local units of government do when they receive an absentee ballot application. So when they do, there are, as I've already stated, there are a variety of ways that they have to check and verify and to make sure through the state voter registration system that the information is correct. If it is correct, and you're right, what we can do here is stop the confusion at its source by those who send these out to begin with. If an individual voter wants to type in their name or take it off of the website in a pre-fill kind of methodology and print it off, that is their choice to do it. We're not restricting them at all. To the local units of government, when they receive an absentee ballot application, they will process it as they do any other time. So this bill in particular deals with those who are distributing and sending out these not requested absentee ballot applications. I'll be glad to take any suggestions from you, Senator Fateh, that you think could be improved here, but we're dealing with the requirements to those who send them out. That's the subject of this bill.
Thank you, Senator Kiffmeyer. Senator Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for you first. Is this bill planned for laying over where it might be able to get some more work to it?
Yes, it'll be laid over.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm noticing the Secretary of State's letter asking us to not vote for this bill. And it's not because he objects to the intent. It's because he thinks that there's more work that needs to be done, which I would agree with him on. And Mr. Chair, I have a question for, actually I have a statement first for Senator Kiffmeyer, and that is that thank you for bringing this up. My personal experience is exactly what you're relaying. I have been confused over these, confused to the degree that I've done some research on where this group is, trying to find out who they're funded by, and also, are they national, are they local, are they a spinoff, just what they are. So I think that whatever we can do to make this more clear is fine with me. So I want to say that there are more things that I think we can do, and you were saying that you're open to any suggestions. I would like to see it handled somewhat like our campaign literature, where it says on it clearly a disclaimer, paid for by, and then the name of the organization so that we can follow up if there is any kinds of issues like that. And also in history, there has been these kinds of practices, and I'm not going to accuse any one party because I think it's been not limited to one party, but where the return envelope goes to a drop box, or it goes to some intermediate where there might be some fiddling with it. There might be some data mining, which is probably okay. But the fact of the matter is it doesn't go back to an authority that is authorized to accept absentee ballot applications. And so what I would say that I would like to see on here is that if there's a pre-printed return envelope, that return envelope go to the Secretary of State or the county or the city or whatever authorized recipient of absentee ballot applications is. And I don't know, and maybe council could help, if something like this is withheld and not sent on to the Secretary of State, is that a crime? Like, for instance, an application for registration is a crime if you don't send that on. Is the lack of sending on an application for an absentee ballot, does that constitute a crime?
Mr. Chair, I suggest we ask Ms. Stengel about that. I
Ms.
do
Stengel?
know that there is statute regarding that, and I think both your ideas are well taken, Senator Carlson.
Ms. Stengel, if you can research that, that would be great, and get it back to the committee. I think that would be fantastic. Senator Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's been a lot of discussion here this morning about confusion by voters, and I certainly agree with that. And consequently, with the amendments that you've put on, which have been good, I can really support subdivision 1. I think that's good. The one thing, I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but I wonder if sometimes just putting something that, complying with U.S. Postal Department guideline standards might be something to consider as part of the bill, too. I do have concerns about subdivision 2. In today's world, I have seen copies sitting side by side, and a person has been asked, tell me which is the original, and you have real difficulty identifying that. And I'm just wondering, again, that may this actually lead to a vote being rejected by someone challenging that. Is this an original, or is this a copy? And I think that's something that, once again, in the world we're living in today, where politicalness is entered into our election process, if that's something we really don't want to get into, with people challenging and then, again, further questioning our election process. So that would be just a comment on that. Thank
Senator
you.
Kiffmeyer, with the amendment, does Section 2 actually exist any longer?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I didn't get that.
Senator Kiffmeyer, I'm just looking at, they went back to the original bill with subdivision 2. I was looking at the amendment, which was a delete all after the enacting clause, and I don't see a Section 2.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That is correct. It was drafted. So when you are making your comments to the original bill, it was laid out differently. The intent and comment is the same, but there's some technical changes. If you look at the A1 amendment, that is what we're working off of. If there's a line number that you have a question that you're referring to, it would help.
Senator Clausen, I think when we did the delete all amendment, Section 2 went away.
Mr. Chair, the language stayed the same. It just was drafted a little bit differently, technically, and so on.
I see that it would pertain to item D, Madam Chair.
Well, 1.21 is subdivision
1.2.
2 on the
Correct.
original bill. In the delete all, it is, the same thing is dealt with, let's see.
But it is,
Well, it states in a different way. It says the absentee ballot application is included, must be blank, and not include the voter's name and address. So just technical drafting of the same idea of not, and by the way, in privacy and other things like that, voters really, really take affront to things being pre-populated like that. I think that's going to be a great help. But, Mr. Chair, Senator Clausen had a specific question or comment that you made in regards to the post office, I believe. I would say that, first of all, anybody who's going to mail, especially many of these are bulk mailing, they have to comply with Postal Service requirements. My concern here is what they actually put on the outside of the envelope. I actually had a little bit more specific language. I was going to say, does not include official ballot, does not include official of any kind, that is stamped on the outside or printed on the outside, being even more specific, to be just absolutely clear, even before they open the envelope, that if they know just that alone, I think that would be helpful. We'll work on some of those things, and one of the reasons why to have the hearing today is to give us time to take that input and take those things under consideration and do that. I do think it is interesting, though, that we're discussing the possibility here of what's real and what's not. And it is important for us to consider those things. And so this bill and the one previously are basically, in essence, kind of trying to do that same thing, making sure. And your comment was, this bill deals with only what goes out to the voter. When the voter sends in an absentee ballot application, that is processed by the local unit of government. Once that has been completed, then they mail out the ballot to the voter. I would say we might want to consider maybe something that helps, because of the look-alike situation there, that we strengthen that as well and make sure that those kinds of things are looked at and considered. And again, the cost of printing those envelopes, once they do, adding another sentence on the outside of an envelope does not increase the cost.
I believe Ms. Stengels has an answer to the question that was asked by Senator Carlson earlier.
Clausen,
No, I think this one was asked by Senator Carlson
Carlson, okay.
earlier. So, Ms. Stengel, can you give us that answer?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Under 203B.08, any person who is an agent, so you designate somebody to return your ballot for you, and that person tampers with the return envelope or the ballot, or does not immediately mail or deliver that envelope to the county auditor or municipal clerk, is guilty of a misdemeanor. So there is some penalty if you keep the envelope and tinker with it, and not return it to somebody other than the auditor or clerk.
Thank you, Ms. Stengel. Senator Clausen, did you have another question, or did we answer that question? Because I interrupted the question.
No, just a comment that, sometimes we get these rather late, and I didn't have a chance to go through all of those. So thanks for that clarification. I still think that, a person could hold up the application for a person because they don't think it's a legal document, because, again, sometimes distinguishing between an original and a duplicate, it's pretty difficult to determine, so.
Thank you, Senator Clausen. Senator Carlson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, I did not clearly hear what the council said about this, about not returning an absentee ballot request, if that actually could be a misdemeanor. Now, this is a request that might have been initiated by a nonprofit, a third party, or anybody else and then was not returned. It's not an official, it's not an official form. It's not doing anything official until it actually gets to the destination, I believe. So if I withheld, if I knew somebody that wanted to get an absentee ballot and I gave them my application to fill out, and then I stuck it in my pocket and either forgot about it or intentionally didn't turn it in or send it in, is that a misdemeanor?
Ms.
Like it
Stengel.
is application for registration.
Ms. Stengel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator Carlson. I think I answered the wrong question then. The question I answered is it's a misdemeanor to not return a ballot immediately. I don't know about an application. I'll have to look and follow up.
Thank you.
Thank you. I promised Mr. Heller an opportunity to speak, so we only got 1 minute, so if you can speak relatively quickly, you can do it. Otherwise, I'm running out of time. Please state your name and make a short comment to the bill, but we do have to move on.
Yeah, my name is Rick Heller. I'm a 60-year-old male with a gray beard with a face shield on, testifying today to State Government Finance Policy Election Committee at the Senate on February 17th. Now, that just took how many seconds? Anyways, come to talk on these two bills, even though the other one is done, the Senate file 2956 and the current 3077. I've been in the process of accessing the Secretary of State for digital accessibility. I've made a data request. There's 5 years of data. I'd be glad to forward to your committee to look over. It has to do with digital accessibility. And I unofficially represent the majority of the twice eligible, and it has to do with web content accessibility guidelines. Example, for the Secretary of State letter, I asked that they check the accessibility of that. It's not accessible.
Thank
Anyhow,
you.
getting back to the bill, Pacific,
Mr. Heller, could you actually just submit that to us in writing, and we'll make it part of the record? And, because I'm actually out of time. I'm going to, if that would work.
yeah, I'll forward to your committee. Hopefully you look the information over. One thing I do want to mention, the county is the one who decides the accessibility and the form of the ballots. And just so you know, the blind made a big deal about the size of the ballots some time ago. Now you're watermarking them for overseas, so is that what you want to do? Anyways, those are some of the quick feedback I give, and that's up to you. You're the leaders. You guide the ship, so thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you. And with that, Senator Kiffmeyer renews her motion for Senate File 3077 as amended be laid over for possible exclusion. For inclusion, excuse me. Gosh, dang it. Bill is laid over. That concludes our business for the day, so the State Government Finance and Policy and Elections Committee is adjourned.